This is the Energizing India podcast.
Today is a special day, Martina, because not only are we talking about hydrogen, we're talking about how hydrogen is changing the world with one of the women in hydrogen, one of the leaders from Europe, who has been a mover and a shaker in the hydrogen industry for the last 8-9 years maybe now, and found the major mojo in the last 2 years, having had some breakthroughs in Sweden. Martina, you are an entrepreneur. You are the co-founder of Nilsson Energy. You previously worked in many different sectors, in the mining sector, in the pulp and paper industry, mobility as well, and then a mature stage in your career, you decided that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and teamed up with two different individuals to create something that had never been done before, which was take energy from the sun or energy from the wind, convert it into hydrogen, and then dispense it into vehicles so that vehicles are having absolute clean energy, clean hydrogen, zero emission mobility. 5 years ago, people laughed at the idea and said it's going to be incredibly expensive, can never be done, too hard to prove, and yet you took the plunge, you did it. You and your team of Nilsson Energy created the world's first green hydrogen filling station at the town of Mariestad in the middle of Sweden, which is now a benchmark globally that people are either trying to copy, emulate, or try and do better. We don't talk about hydrogen so much in India because we're still in the early stages of the transition, and it's all about electric, but hydrogen is coming. We are at the same stage where Sweden was maybe 5 years ago, where it was a laughable subject. So I'm interested, Martina, from your perspective, what were you thinking when you decided that you were going to take the plunge into hydrogen?
Thank you so much, and lovely being here, Robin. Yes, well, one of the benefits of being an entrepreneur is that you don't think too much when you're doing it because you're driven by passion and the sense that you can make a difference. And for us, it has been important to underline and underscore that you can utilize renewable energy, you can store it for a number of different applications, mobility being one. But the sheer fact that it can be relevant to do small-scale applications, because even though it may be a laughing stock, there are a few friends around the globe that have been working intensely on small-scale applications and small-scale hardware, and they are ready, so they should be applied. So maybe it wasn't so much of a think tank on my side, but a passion to also to do a really valuable contribution to shifting out from fossil.
So you've raised an important point. You've talked about small scale. And when you look at hydrogen, particularly in India, people are talking megawatt scale. The smallest projects are 50 megawatt and, the average size of the project is 20 megawatt. Nobody's talking about small scale, clearly because there is a lack of understanding or belief that small scale can be economic. And yet you have focused singularly. Your business is about small scale. So you don't make electrolyzers, you're buying electrolyzers, but you're putting in place an integrated system with embedded software that controls the system to take solar or wind energy and give you hydrogen that's dispensed in a vehicle at a small scale. And not only have you done it successfully in your first station, you are now recreating that in 24 locations across Sweden. That is the largest such program in the world. You've also signed a program in Australia where you'll be recreating what you're doing in Sweden in Australia at a large scale as well. A significantly large number of small scale units, to put it correctly. How does it work for small scale, and how are the economies today? Are the people who are only focusing on large scale wrong? Have you proven that small scale is also economic?
I think, just to be very frank, that's done in a sister company called 𝐼RH currently, but underneath the same umbrella and family. I think that with every technology, one needs to embrace that there is progress. And if I take this from the European Commission and the European perspective, there is a huge amount of money poured into the electrolyzers and the fuel cells and the similar technologies. And why is that? Because we need to scale up. Obviously, we need to scale up. But we need to do that. So we need to have people like myself and my friends who can integrate those into systems, because otherwise they won't be, there'll be no purpose for them. So you need to do that. I would never ever speak badly about large-scale projects. They are needed. But what I am underlining and underscoring is that you need to add robustness into the system. You cannot just rely upon one pipeline. which is often the case. You shouldn't do that for many different reasons, not least for security reasons. Because if you add decentralized to that system, you add a new business logic, and you need to be creative. So the equations need to be shifted. That would be my argument.
Excellent. So you raise a very pertinent point, and that is decentralized. So let's talk about what that means. You've had these two pipelines coming from Russia through to continental Europe that have been blown up, and lots of intrigue on who did it, whether it was the friendlies or the enemies. But decentralized is about delevering from the hydrocarbon molecule. Well, I often call it the tyranny of the hydrocarbon molecule, because a lot of geopolitics around the world is geared around access to oil today. And when you talk about decentralized manufacture of hydrogen, you're talking about ultra small scale where anybody can do it. You can do it in a building, in a school, you can do it for a filling station, and you really do not need to be part of a grid. And you're democratizing this in a way which is going to change the world. For us, I think that's what's most exciting. Suddenly everybody can make energy. You do not need to be digging up big holes in sand to give you access to energy, and you do not need a navy and an air force that protects that access to that oil, which a lot of the global defense forces have become today. So let's talk about your opinion on that. I know that is your major motivation at Nilsson Energy. So let's talk about this decentralized energy creation.
I think it's important also to bring water into that equation, because that's something that really needs to be focused, because if you are making a stationary application, you need to borrow water locally. You can have that recirculated, but it still needs to be water involved. So that's very important. The fact that you can utilize the local sun, the local wind, the local hydro, whatever you have available, and really do what you just said is so important. And the fact that when I flew in to India, there is so much footprint already there, all these factories, and they are not always covered by solar, but they could be. And the fact that that could make them not being dependent on diesel for their backup systems. It's a given. It can happen. It's quite easily done. And that's one of the things that I would like to underscore. All of these backup systems that are in place for a number of different reasons, security reasons, or for it could be to do with your insurances. All of these, they can be addressed. And if you start doing that, there's a movement. But you need to do it, because if you do it, it's visible, it's tangible, and it will happen. So I would really encourage not to go, wait for all the huge money that needs to be there for the largest project in the world. Do small stuff, because it will trickle, and it will become a flood.
So it's a good point you raise, which is every building around the world has a diesel generator. Every phone cell station has a diesel generator. And now not only have you got a diesel generator with an ICE engine, you've got this supply chain of diesel that needs to come to it. There's pilferage along the way. There's all sorts of costs in getting your energy. And here, the Nilsson Energy solution is really about solar panels that are sitting on your roof that takes the sun and uses a fuel cell to create hydrogen, or uses an electrolyzer to create hydrogen and then a fuel cell to create electricity back again. Very simple, and yet everybody shied away from it because of the rare earths. So there's this argument that says, look, you're just transferring one problem to another. You're taking the diesel hole in the ground away, and then now you're doing another hole for platinum and titanium and all sorts of other rare earths that you need in an electrolyzer and a fuel cell. I know that at Nilsson particularly, I know we were partnering with Nilsson to talk about this as well, to work with different universities to see how we might be able to fund programs that explore how you can convert water into hydrogen and hydrogen into electricity without rare earths. But what do you say to that argument, which is, you're just replacing one hole in the ground with another, even though the emissions are lower?
I think there's a portion of truth in that, but I also think, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy that we will be bringing an official Swedish delegation here this week, actually, to focus on the replacement of and research, because there are alternatives that are still not commercialized, but that need to be commercialized. And I pride myself, and not least I think that my co-founder, Mr. Nilsson, is so brave, the way that we've opened up our living lab to really try out and work with to commercialize these products, because that's always going to be a challenge. yes, there is that argument that you say, and is it without any faults? No, it isn't. But one needs to be educated and understand recirculation of material as well as being a very intricate part of this. So it's not going to be solved in one move, and not everything is solved by hydrogen, but the combination of and the realization of that the small scale is available, and the people are aware of these issues is important. We can't just sit around. We need to utilize what's around and try and make our best. So design for recycling is extremely important.
So Martina, can you define what is small scale, just for our audience, so that they understand where the line is between big, large, and small?
Well, it can be anything from 0.5 kilowatt up until the megawatt scale. For us, maybe a small scale will be 1 to 20 megawatts install capacity, and anything above that. But it's a moving target.
You've also done 250 kilowatts and 300 kilowatt projects, haven't you?
Yeah, small scale indeed, and it can be very relevant. Again, if you could store, because there's the storage of hydrogen as well, which will add costs. So you need to have an equation where you can utilize what you're producing, so that you can go all the way full PLC, if you like, and also full value chain. If you could do that locally and have an understanding of that, you are able to do that, it will be very successful because it will be relevant for you.
So let's talk about Nilsson and your technology, which is small scale energy independence, if I were to put it any other way. How does this work?
And independence to a level. I mean, I'm not against the grid. I'm not against the infrastructure that's in place, but we need to be creative and work together with it, so that there could be the business arrangements between the producer, and the producer doesn't have to be centralized. It can be decentralized. We're working with a local grid who can be owned by somebody else. So that's important. What we do is that we make sure that these hardware and software work as a system, an integrated system, in a safe manner. And one has to underline that, because we are still dealing with compressed gas, sometimes a lot of energy being stored under pressure, and it's not for the faint-hearted, I'd say, to be a system where to integrate and take full responsibility from the very first design up until service and maintenance, and make sure that it works in all the different prerequisites, the different climate, the different A, B, and C. So I think that's what we add, and I hope that there will be many of us that can, because otherwise the technology is just there. It needs to be utilized, and I am one of those who say that why are these companies being on the stock market too early? Because if they are just focusing on the numbers of products and not what the product can actually acquire and bring to the society, there is a bit of a mix of a reasoning there. So I'd underline long-term money. It's important to have long-term money in the hydrogen industry.
So you've looked at the world, and today you focus on Europe, and we know that one of the problems that Nilsson faces is that your demand is more than you can supply, and you're constrained in many ways by your partner suppliers. People giving you electrolyzers, fuel cells, are all booked out for 24 months. Do you see that changing, or do you see a need for some sort of dissonance to happen in the market? Because today, the move to small-scale hydrogen or even large-scale hydrogen is really being constrained by the inability of the present suppliers to facilitate this growth.
Yeah, I think that's what really is setting us apart, is that we have been long-term since day one. We have really invested in our relations, which means that I hope my suppliers and partners are confident that we know what we are doing. And I think one of the things that has been really underscored, if we take that to the European Commission again, is the fact that we need to take away the threshold that knowledge and know-how is bringing to the table. If you are not knowledgeable enough, you will not be able to buy the technology, and that's a fact. Because they want to feel secure that you could take that on board and bring that in a safe manner, And it will be terrible if we've had, a number of different accidents or incidents with hydrogen. It can't happen. So I think it's not only the hardware that's limitation, it's the immaturity of the organizations, it's the immaturity of the knowledge level, and that needs to be addressed acutely. We've had a living lab, and Mr. Nilsson and Mrs. Nilsson open up their home for well over 7,000 people. Just to say,
the Guinness Book of World Records is the most visited house in the world.
Which is sweet and lovely, and it says something about our DNA, I hope. But the fact that we do that and they are willing to do that has been important, because this is what it is. It's all about. There's no smoke involved. There is no. Yes, it's still a risk that needs to be managed, but it's doable and it's there, and that's important.
So you've touched on safety, and safety usually means regulation, and above regulations it's policy. You're part of the EU Hydrogen, Clean Hydrogen Alliance, I think it's called, and you're also part of the Swedish Hydrogen Council. What do these alliances and councils do for the hydrogen sector?
Underneath the Commission, there has been the CEO roundtables, and we have been focusing on from the production of hydrogen up until the transmission and the usage of hydrogen. I've been very actively involved in the buildings side of things. It's actually setting up the framework for the legislation and the red tape, if you like, but also, like I said, have identified that knowledge and know-how is extremely important, and how do we address that? The permitting side of things is extremely important. When we started off, there weren't any references. There were references from within the industry fence, but we are now bringing hydrogen into new settings, which means that all of a sudden there was insecurities about, how this hasn't been done before. How should we make that? What kind of permitting? What kind of? So that acutely need to be addressed. And I would underscore the importance for India to be very forward-leaning when it comes to education on this, because if that doesn't happen, the permitting doesn't happen, you may end up in riskful situations, and you need to avoid that as much as you can.
If you look at hydrogen as a sector, the leaders in this sector today are the countries in Scandinavia. It's really Norway and Sweden, and then the lower parts of Europe geographically. I mean, Germany took it on, then France, and now you're starting to see a percolation across Europe. Suddenly, the rest of the world's woken up. Australia has its own hydrogen policy. India has committed $54 billion to hydrogen, green hydrogen, in the next decade. What is it about Scandinavia particularly that made hydrogen such a fertile plain so early in the piece?
I don't know whether it is or not. Is it? I suppose the steel, the green steel, is a major factor, and obviously there are huge investments being made, and honestly, the whole of Sweden is being tipped upside down. It used to be that nobody, you left when you were young if you were born in the northern part of the country. Now you're moving back because it's such an immense amount of new people being poured into different regions. So I think that's the same thing. But for me, it's large scale and it will happen, but there are so much things you could do in the meantime. And again, back to decentralize and what actually works. So we need to do that as well. There is an acute. We are a plus producer of electricity in Sweden, as an example. That isn't the common knowledge. The common knowledge is that there is a power lack, and there's a power acute situation for going green steel, not least. So you need to make sure, and also bring in the renewable sector into the equation, and the provision of water into this. So you need to have, again, back to being knowledgeable about what hydrogen really is.
So you talked about permits and the need for countries to go leaning early into the education to make sure that this can be facilitated. And for me, one of my worries is countries like India, and you can include Indonesia and parts of Africa, and that would be slow to understand that, and the opportunity to get permits is so complex for small scale. It's very easy for large scale because everybody understands large scale. But to get permits for a building to start to make its own hydrogen and to be off-grid is going to be an incredibly complex thing for regulators to understand. They understand diesel, they understand generators, and a generator can be in a very unsafe condition anyway, and nobody will have a problem with it. But to start talking about hydrogen then brings back the Hindenburg, and we start, we as an industry, we're suffering because of the Zeppelin 100 years later. What are the things that you have learned in Sweden that our audience in India could be aware of as an early learning on how regulators could be educated about permits and policies on small-scale hydrogen?
Yeah, let me maybe answer you in this way. So if there's a culture and an understanding of the large scale, use that. So you have local production, and then you just emulate what has been done always. Maybe you should transport the hydrogen, so that you only have the fuel cells at the different factories or whatever. That could be done. Obviously, you couldn't utilize the footprint of every factory to the same extent. But if there is a system that's working, make sure that transport is emission free. So at least you are beginning and you are doing stuff. I don't just sit around and wait for things to happen, because they won't. I think you need to lead, and you need to lead by example. And I am totally oblivious about the Indian way of permitting, so I wouldn't even want to venture into that, because I'm not knowledgeable enough. But what I can say is that you need to have an example also for them, so that somebody can pride themselves that I was involved in the first permit when this and the A, B, and C happened.
Are you looking at India as a market? Do you think that it's too early in the piece for your technology?
I think it's absolutely super. And one of the reasons why I feel that we should really connect the world through hydrogen is the fact that it can bring other stuff as well. It can bring robustness and security to the infrastructure and the current grid, and the provision of sanitation and water and all these things that humanity needs.
Martina, you're part of Women in Hydrogen, which is a great initiative, bringing together many women leaders globally in the hydrogen sector. Tell us a little bit about what Women in Hydrogen is and what you're doing.
It's actually called Women in Green Hydrogen.
Okay.
So that's a statement, and I think that was important. It was an initiative that came out of Germany first, because there were a few ladies there that were facing a situation where they felt they weren't really being heard, or maybe that they wanted to have different positions, and they felt that they could really contribute. And there are many skilled ladies in the industry. So it was a very small initiative that became quite large very fast. We are a very closely knit society around the world. I think now there are about 2,700, maybe 3,000 women who have submitted their CVs, so that you cannot argue that there aren't any ladies available with who are knowledgeable, who have the background. So I think that is important. They're very, very actively involved, say when they are at the hydrogen conferences, and we really welcome and work with guys. There are many guys who are supporting this and are part of that equation.
So the initiative is to bring together women who are working in green hydrogen, or to open doors for more employment for women in green hydrogen?
Both. Not least if I am on the stages, which I am on occasion at these conferences, I tend to be the only lady there, or has been at least. That's growing and it's changing, and I think it should, because we have different perspectives. It's not about gender. It's about what you can bring and the way your thought process and your experiences that you can bring to the table. So I think I love everybody on the planet. It doesn't matter who you are, but obviously there is a legacy there that needs to be addressed.
So Martina, India and many countries in this region are now just starting their journey on the energy transition. Many missteps in solar 15 years ago, which led to a domination of Chinese products in the sector. From your experience, having already seen it in a couple of countries, what are the steps that a country goes through in its transition from fossil fuels and hydrocarbon related energy to hydrogen?
Yeah, I think that it is important that people realize. I think it starts from the ability and the willingness to store energy. until it's needed in different applications. And also the fact that you can transport it, and that's one of the things that needs to be addressed as well, is the transportation of hydrogen, because that's not a given in any country. So again, the awareness of the full value chain and how things how things match in the equation is important, because it has to be a process. It cannot just be addressed as a single matter, because it isn't. On that subject, maybe also underline that it shouldn't be batteries or hydrogen, because we need them both, but we need the right amount of batteries and electrolyzers and fuel cells and storage and compression as well.
One of the benefits of hydrogen, though, is it is easily stored at high pressure. It can be blended with ammonia for transportation. It doesn't have to always be liquefied. It can be put into an existing gas pipeline, replacing natural gas pipelines with hydrogen pipelines. It can be put into a grid system. It can be reticulated. So in many ways, the existing knowledge base on management of a gas already is something that can be very synergistically leveraged for the storage and distribution of hydrogen. Martina, a question I wanted to pose to you is about electric versus hydrogen, and I'll tell you why I asked this. I always smile when people start to fight about electric versus hydrogen, because that means that opinions are forming and you're starting to get these religious silos of Catholic versus Methodist, and so you got electric versus battery, or battery swap versus charge, and then you got hydrogen versus electric, which means people are buying into the future of the energy transition and they're forming very certain opinions, and that's a good thing. They might not be the right opinions, but it's a good thing. So quite often it's said electric is, if you were to use the analogy of the mobile phone era, you had the pagers and then you had distributed mobile systems, GSM, CDMA, the Japanese system, and now everyone uses GSM, right? And everything else is history. And if you use the same analogy, it's often said EVs are the pager of this transition and the future is hydrogen, and everybody gets very violently angry about that. How do you see the future, electric versus hydrogen?
It's both electric mobility and should be treated as such. There's never going to be one solution for everything. EVs are super in some instances. Hydrogen will be super when things are heavy and you need to shift a lot of load. I think I'd leave that to the industry. They know all of this, but one has to realize that it's all electric mobility. So that cat fight may be necessary for some reasons, but not for reality. What I would add, though, is the fact that you should focus on the infrastructure. Because what if you have the best EVs of the world, but there isn't any power? So you need to have, again, the whole value chain approach. I'd be a bit scared if I was in the automotive industry. I've invested a huge amount of money into my EV platform just to realize that, okay guys, there is not sufficient power out there. Will I be selling my products? No, I will not. And this is where hydrogen comes into the equation, because we can store energy until it's needed, so we can back up that lack of power. We could leverage. Again, make it up, educate people so that they see this. And hopefully this podcast has at least been a smidgen to address that issue.
I'm going to touch on a subject that I know is close to your heart, heavily so, and that is the present geopolitical situation with Russia and Ukraine and its impact on Europe. But more importantly, whether this impact that it's having on Europe is going to accelerate the energy transition to hydrogen and decentralization, because it's brought front and center clear in the minds of leaders and politicians how reliant we are on very unstable supply chains in these unstable times.
I believe so. And I believe so for good reasons. And I believe so for all the questions I'm being asked and the discussions I'm being included into. So I believe that. And it's a very forward-leaning situation underneath Ursula von der Leyen currently. It's very forward-leaning, much more so than I would have thought. It's running quite fast. And the serious side of this, which is always so sad, is that people are suffering immensely. And if this could bring any good out of all of this, it will be amazing. but it's a sad reason why it's happening. But I think security and robustness, and we haven't even started to mention how we need to secure these systems when we develop them in a safe manner, and how they should be protected from a data perspective. That's something I would love for there to be a hydrogen and a security alliance. So you realize that we are providing so much opportunities for the current infrastructure and society.
I was at a hydrogen conference, I think it was 6 months ago, and one of the things that surprised me was that there were 3 delegates there who were from the FBI. And after a few glasses of wine, we decided to corner them to find out what they were doing here. But they were there essentially on the very subject you touched on, which was security of supply chains and understanding what it means for the industry, and to learn how the industry works to be able to contribute on securing supply chains. So it's very interesting that the world has moved to the point where, even the security agencies are now very actively thinking about securing energy supply chains. So it's a very, very important point to make. Martina W, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Sweden to the 𝐼RTMIS studios of Energizing India. Look forward to having you back here again soon, and safe travels through your journeys in India.
Thank you, an amazing experience, and thank you for having me.